Hello. Hi, Brian. Hi, Celine.
Hey, Roxanne and
Hello.
Celine.
Nice
Hello,
to
hi
see
everyone.
you. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this masterclass about the Discovery Framing Checklist. My name is Roxanne. I'm the co-founder of Panache, and I'm today with Celine, Brian Green, our brilliant product discovery program lead. Happy to be on stage with you guys. So to start, let me share a few words about Panache. At Panache, we help product teams make a better use of their resources on a daily basis. And we'll focus today on discovery. Succeeding in discovery means doing more with less, learning faster without disappearing for months in a discovery tunnel. There is one observation that constantly hits back. Discovery initiatives that fail are discovery initiatives that aren't properly framed. And by that, I mean that we want to answer too much, running massive user interviews with all target groups, which paralyze the whole product design and research teams. It also means that our discovery objectives are to learn everything we can instead of the most urgent things to validate first. And most important, it means that no clear outcomes are defined before starting the discovery work. The outcome is the why we are doing the discovery. It's what success should look like. It's what you should constantly look at to know if you're moving toward the right direction. Discovery is this constant dual loop: define the outcome, collect evidence. What are we trying to achieve, and are we getting closer? The Discovery Framing Checklist you'll discover is a guide to make room for the right discussions. It's not a rigid set of rules, and it's not a magical recipe. It's a frame for conversation and alignment. In some cases, you will have the autonomy to answer most questions and prioritize a discovery objective on your own, and that's very good for you. But in most cases, you'll have to tweak and adapt this checklist to facilitate the right conversations with colleagues from the business, marketing, and tech teams. So we had this idea of today's talks with Brian and Celine to tackle all the questions, use cases you may face or want to experiment with. And by the way, this checklist is part of our second module of our product discovery program. So if you want to learn more, you can go check out our website, panache.io, or reach me through LinkedIn. I'll be happy to have a chat with you. So how this talk is going to work, Brian will start giving you a bit of context, the behind the scene on why and how he created and improved this checklist over his years at Bumble, Etsy, and Hopin. And we'll then dive into each section of the checklist, the outcomes, profiles, opportunity and solutions, riskiest areas. And we'll discuss examples on how to facilitate each step, the do's and don'ts, and the common pitfalls to avoid. So please make this session your own. Celine will moderate the questions from the chat, so don't be shy. We want it to be like a good conversation. Okay? So let's go, guys. Brian, I will share with you the mic. So happy to have this session with you today. Thank you for being there. And yeah, can you share a bit of your background, yourself, and the why and how you created and improved the discovery checklist over the few past years?
All right. Thanks for the intro, Roxanne. Super excited to be here with you as well, talking about one of my favorite things in the world, which is product discovery. So a little bit about myself. So besides being product discovery program lead here at Panache, I'm also currently leading research at StreamYard. If you're not familiar with StreamYard, it's actually what you all are using to tune into this webinar right now. And besides webinars, StreamYard is also a studio for podcasters and live streamers to create content and connect with their audiences. And is part of Hopin, which is a larger company. It's a multi-product organization focused on connecting businesses and creators to their audiences. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about this checklist, but I think what's really important in terms of background, like as Roxanne mentioned, previous to StreamYard, I have roles at Bumble, Etsy, and Meetup. I also had a stint as an entrepreneur for a long time and had a lot of opportunities to both participate in and lead discoveries throughout the years, like many different times, both large and small, right? From all the way from organizational transformations to driving discovery in sort of a continuous discovery format inside of pods. And what that's allowed me to do is have a lot of opportunities to try out different things, experiment with different ways of doing discovery. And what I've been able to learn over the years is that you can actually distill the critical elements of framing into a few key steps. And that's what we have here inside of this checklist. And now, partnership through Panache, actually been able to iterate and adjust that checklist. And we will continue to iterate and adjust it over the years. And at the end, I'll put a plug in for anyone that actually utilizes or tries it. We'd love to hear from you about how that goes inside of your organization. I think what's really important about this and what's really critical about this checklist is I've found that these are the things that are extremely flexible and adaptable. And what I mean by that is everyone does discovery inside of a different organization, inside of a different team. We use different words, we use different terms, but the principles that underpin the 4 key steps of this checklist are very flexible and adaptable. I found them to work in organizations that are very large and very small, in public companies, in startups, and I've found them to be useful for folks that are very skeptical of discovery, for folks that are very bought into discovery. And so we'll go more in depth into the individual components of the checklist. But I think what's really important is to just understand that flexibility and adaptability are really critical. Like any model or any framework, the importance is actually in how you're able to apply it and utilize it inside of your own context, much less than following the individual steps. And so it's very possible to take the different things inside of the checklist and utilize it in your own context, adjust it. And that's what I've done over the years, right? And so each time I've done it, it's been a little bit different, but you just have to follow these kind of key steps, and we'll walk through what they are in a second. And yeah, and as Roxanne was saying, if you have questions throughout, please throw them into the chat, into the comments. We're going to address it. At the end of the day, it's very important that we make this interactive, because our goal is to give everyone here a tool that you can use inside of your own organization. So this is a critical point to make sure that we actually have a little bit more interactivity as we kind of go through this.
Yeah, completely. And a few last thing, some of you already have the tool. We shared it through LinkedIn, but if you don't, we'll share it to you through email after the session. So don't worry, guys. Okay, so let's dive in, Brian.
Okay. Yeah, let's jump into it. Actually, folks, who already has the tool? Do most of the folks here have you already seen it already? Like if you could just maybe throw like something inside the chat, just let us know.
On the chat.
All right. But for everybody else, what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through it, and then what we'll do is go a little bit more in depth into each of the different stages as we go. So broadly speaking, in the beginning, right, we're talking about framing, and why is framing really important for discovery, right? This is the key moment of alignment between the product team members, the different cross-functional partners, and the key stakeholders to align around what's the expected impact and scope for discovery, right? This is a really critical moment to both assess and understand what you already know, but also align expectations and goals. And what's really important about this is that the sort of the ultimate success or failure of discovery can most often be tied back to whether this is done well or this is done poorly or whether this is not done at all, right? And so what's really key here is that you're aligning on the critical things with the right people to make sure that you're starting and focusing in the right direction to have a successful discovery experience. Right, one of the really critical things with discovery is making sure that it's useful and applicable to the broader organization, and having a really strong framing is the foundation that will set you up for success. And so,
and you see, guys, that it's a team play. I really see that part of the discovery is a team sport. The ideal word is not to work on that by yourself, and we'll discuss that a lot on each steps.
Yeah, ultimately, the more interconnection that you can have between the discovery process and the key stakeholders, the team, and the more functions that can participate, the stronger the discovery outcome is going to be in the long run. And so, yes, solo discovery is almost like not doing discovery at all, as Roxanne is saying. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to move over to show you the kind of 4 steps from the discovery framing checklist. And what I'm going to do is just give you a really quick overview of them, and then we're going to go more in depth into each of them and talk about some specific things. So the key first step is starting with clear outcomes, right? I'm going to go into more depth about what that means, but this is really about aligning stakeholders on the business and product outcomes your work should impact. The second step inside of this process is to select a target profile, right? This is prioritizing the people that are going to have the most direct impact on those outcomes. The third step, and something that I often see missed or overlooked, is reviewing existing work. And that's really mapping out all of the different things you already know, all of the things that you're already working on, all of that existing knowledge, work that's is scoped out or in delivery or planned, and making sure you're setting that foundation, framing discovery around what already exists and what's already planned. I'll talk a little bit more in depth there, but that's also a step that is often missed or underutilized.
Right.
And then the next step is identifying your riskiest areas. And we're going to go more in depth into this as we get there, but this is a really critical moment for the team, for the broader organization, and often is the richest part of the discovery process and one of the key moments of the discovery framing. And that's really when you're inviting your customer, business, and tech experts to assess those opportunity and solution spaces and discuss the potential risks that underpin them.
Let's dive in.
Okay, cool. All right. So the first step is starting with clear outcomes. And so we have defined business outcomes and product outcomes. Now, you may use a different language inside of your organization. Sometimes some folks might use North Star metrics. Some people might use OKRs. I think what's really important, again, is the principle that underpins this, which is that these are the core things that you care about as a business. The business outcome is a very high level. It should be set by executive leadership, and it describes the overall vision that you're trying to drive as a business. If you're in an e-commerce marketplace, when I was at Etsy, that was GMS, which was gross merchandise sales for us. Our overall business metric was to drive that, and then our product teams each had a role to play in that, and the product outcome is then the outcome at the product level that then ladders up to contribute to that business outcome. What's really important with the outcomes is that they're specific, measurable, and in the control span of your team, and the outcomes form the foundation for everything else. And so if you are unclear about the outcomes that you should be driving, but you're hoping to be running in discovery, going through this checklist will really quickly identify for you that this is something that needs to be clarified or understood, because having ambiguity or a lack of clarity around outcomes makes the rest of it very, very difficult.
Yeah. And first thing, can you maybe zoom in a bit on the mirror board, Brian? Perfect.
Sure.
Cool. Thanks. And I have a question for you. In practice, so we talk about business product outcomes. And in practice, what stakeholders are typically involved or influence the definition of the outcome at a business level and product level?
Sure. Yeah, the business outcome is executive leadership and should very much be handed down to a team. So it's very much a top-down process. Product outcomes are going to depend on the team and the organization. They could be top-down from senior leadership. That could be VP, head, director level. They could be bottoms up from the team themselves. And in a perfect world, there's sort of a back and forth kind of negotiation in between those things. Like if it's a bottom up motion, the team can be proposing those outcomes and then aligning on them with senior leadership and confirming kind of that this is something that is going to drive towards the outcomes that everyone is trying to achieve. But I think that that's like the sort of key model for thinking it through.
Okay. And do you have any tips on how to engage a conversation with stakeholders to clarify these outcomes?
Sure. First, hopefully you're doing this early and often. So hopefully before you kind of your team is like, we need to be doing discovery, there is an ongoing conversation. oftentimes the organizations will have some sort of cadence of interactions, whether that be like product reviews or other types of reviews where you can start to have these conversations.
Mm.
But yeah, I think it's really important that it happens at that senior leadership level. Like if you're like an IC product manager, making sure that you're aligning with your director around where that needs to be focused. And then as a business, ideally you have clarity around what the business is trying to drive.
Mm.
Um, but if you don't really striving to understand what that vision and overall North Star is a really important starting point.
Yeah. And okay, so it's been a few cohorts that we lead together. So we've been like meeting a lot of people, sometimes struggling, defining outcomes. What are the common like mistakes or pitfalls, sorry, you observed when trying to build or define these outcomes?
Uh, sure. I think some common mistakes are using a business outcome instead of a product outcome, right? That creates too broad of a scope. Like if you're working on a product team and you're looking to do discovery and you're taking on something so broad as just driving GMS, for example, inside
Yeah.
of an e-commerce marketplace. Like at the end of the day, right, you want it to be specific, measurable, but within inside of your span of control. So what's happening at that sort of product level? So making it
Mhm.
something more about like, can you increase conversion rate at a certain point, or can you do a smaller piece to drive that? Like, so one pitfall is doing something that's too broad. Another one is too specific. So it's almost like you're going from like the macro to the
Yeah.
micro. But if you're looking at something very, very specific, you could actually be looking at something that's more of a traction metric, right? Which is more of like an indication that you're actually getting towards the behavior change that you need to enable to get there. And so I think it's really getting that right level that maps back to a behavior that you're trying to drive without being too big or too small.
Okay.
Um, and then another one is just like not having it be measurable, something that's like too broad, like being really important about how you're going to measure it is really key, because at the end of
Mm.
the day, that's how you're going to assess the value and of the discovery and how you're going to operationalize it, and also understand how you're tracking against your goals.
Okay. Thanks. And last question, maybe from my side. Don't hesitate, guys, if you have any
Yeah.
question on defining business product outcomes. First step of the discovery framing part. Um, so we talked about business product outcomes. It's what we use here at Panache. You also talked about North Star metrics. So is there any differences between these two ways? Is there any other type of outcomes we should start with?
Well, I mean, another common model would be OKRs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of companies will use OKRs, and you can fit those models into this as well, right? So like you can have a product North Star and a business North Star, and again, it's about that thinking of not delivering a thing, but delivering like a change, right? And
Yeah.
that's what's really key about outcomes. And so whether you call it an objective and a key result, or whether you call them North Stars, it doesn't necessarily matter. And that's where the flexibility and the adaptability comes into play.
Mm-hmm.
What's really important is that you're focusing not on we're going to build a thing, but we're going to deliver this change in behavior and we can measure it. And we've decided that it's important for the following set of reasons. And
Mm.
so in that sense, you could use those different models. And in this model, an OKR fits really neatly with an objective very much could be the business outcome, and the key results could be a product outcome, something a little bit smaller. And
Okay.
so, yeah, you have the flexibility to adapt it. And you could even, if you want, if you're using KPIs, different things, all of those things fit together as long as you're focusing on what's the product level behavior you're changing and what's the business level behavior that ladders up to.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks. So first step, make it
Okay.
clear about what success look like. And then you can move to the next one.
Exactly. And so then the next piece is, right, so you've got the outcomes that you're trying to deliver, is to select a target profile. And this is really important. Like these are the people that you're looking to impact, and then they're going to change their behavior, which leads to the outcome that you're trying to enable. And so this is a really key step, right? And so you can call this in different ways. We call it selecting a target profile. And then one framing that's really helpful is to think about these hot targets and cold targets. And so when you're sort of looking at all of the different types of customers, or you could use personas or segments or different things, like the hot target is who within inside of this has the most direct or significant impact on the product outcome. So you start to see how like having that product outcome defined and aligned on is really important, because all the other things map back to it, right? And so understanding who your target profile is all about identifying which segment, persona, or profile has the most direct or significant impact back on that outcome. And a cold target would then be a profile that has indirect or less significant impact. And that's really the way we think about prioritizing that, right? We can have many different customers in a marketplace. You could have buyers, you could have sellers, you could have other tertiary kind of personas. In consumer companies, you'll have different models. And really, this is about thinking back to that outcome you're trying to drive. And of those, which of the ones is the most important? And then getting really clear about who you want to be focusing on.
Mm. And do you have, I mean, I have one in mind, but do you have maybe the one mistake we can see when we try to identify this different type of target audience?
Yeah, so I think a key mistake is thinking about demographics as opposed to behaviors. Ultimately, we're kind of in the business of changing behavior. That's like what all of this is about, right? And so if we just think about like, okay, a person 35, male,
Right.
lives this city, kind of the standard persona or marketing persona template that you might see, that doesn't give you the insight that you're necessarily going to need. And so looking at the behavioral aspects, whether that's like using like a jobs to be done framework or another one of these frameworks, but understanding the actual behaviors at play are really important. And then you're able to actually leverage, if you have it, your own internal analytics, your own data, a number of different things in starting to define and understand those profiles.
Right. And actually, in my opinion, if we're not able to clearly identify who are our hot and cold target audience, it could say that our whole discovery would be very exploratory in order to learn about this cold and hot target audience, much more than just relying on hypotheses or demographics. So maybe the discovery is just made to identify who they are, build the jobs to be done card, build the personas maybe, and then go deeper in the discovery. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's really the power of a checklist. So it's like kind of like if you get to step one and you don't know what those outcomes are, you need to start and understand that. If you get to step two and you're just saying, we don't have any idea who our customers are or our prospective customers are, it's a thing in a 0 to 1 environment that you might find. It's more common inside of startups. But yeah, then all of a sudden, your discovery efforts, it may actually just be foundational research in a way of just understanding who are these potential people and what are the potential needs, and some very much structured hypothesis generation around who those are and building that out. I 100% agree.
Yeah, exactly. And we actually have a question, a cool one from Alex, which is, can the discovery be valuable if you do not have a clear business outcome, OKR, North Star metric, etc.?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think it's very difficult for it to be, because ultimately, what are you measuring against, and what are you trying to achieve? And I think what you might find there is that you might start to use discovery as a sort of proxy or an attempted way of kind of getting towards a vision and more of like a higher level strategy. And it's almost like boiling the ocean in a way. And then you're sort of, it's hard to say, was it a success? Wasn't it a success? What was you really doing? And so it's quite difficult.
Yeah, and actually, we often hear I don't know when to start my discovery. I know when to stop my discovery work as well. In my opinion, you cannot know when to stop it if you don't define what success is. So if you want to frame your discovery to have like a clear scope and make sure that you stop it, you have worked enough and you collected enough information and you unrisked enough things, it's all linked to how well you framed the expected outcome. Yeah, hope it helps.
Yeah, 100%. It's like, where do you start? Where do you
Yeah.
stop? And how can you tell if it's successful? And so to me, it's like if you're going through that process and you're going through this checklist and you're saying we just don't have these, then the first step is really to push to define what those are. And then that becomes a really helpful conversation. And then even if you're able to get to a reasonably confident or somewhat confident hypothesis and then create that definition, that gives you the structure around which to run the discovery. And then that can come back with additional learnings that could then inform iterations. But it's best to start somewhere rather than hoping this open-ended process will find all of this for you. And yeah, it's very difficult.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move to the next section.
All right. So reviewing existing work. And so apologies for the can't get everything in the frame here on the Zoom. So this is a step that is really important and often seen missed, and I've found is actually one of the ones that's really helpful, particularly for bringing along folks that might be a little bit skeptical of discovery. And so reviewing existing work encapsulates a bunch of different things, but right at this point you have kind of a target profile, you have outcomes. Reviewing existing work says, what have you done already? Like, what has already been delivered? What have you shipped? And how has that affected the target profile that you have? And how has that affected the outcomes you have? And so this also includes work that you may have pending towards delivery. Like this could be things that you've already committed to. And one of the things that I often will see, and we'll often see inside of our cohorts, is this pushback around discovery of like, well, we don't want to reinvent the wheel, we don't want to open everything up. And reviewing existing work is really important because it grounds discovery around the things that the organization is already doing. And so work that you've already committed to, it could be for the next quarter or beyond, is still really important to understand. And so really what you want to do is say, what have we done? How has it performed? What did we already learn from this? And then what work are we already committed towards that's aligned toward this outcome and for these particular customers or profiles? And so on the opportunity side, it's like, what do you know about the target's profiles, needs, struggles, wishes? And so we use opportunity. You may also use problem discovery. Again, like the language is, you can use it however you want. And we also use a similar model to the opportunity solution tree, if you folks are familiar with that from Teresa Torres. Again, this is about visualizing, and you can use it in different ways. But what's important is really putting all of the different higher level opportunities on the board. Like, what are all of the different things that you already considered or tried to do that will actually deliver on that outcome for these specific people? And it's really key with the opportunities that they're written in a customer-centric way. At Panache, we like to say, what are their needs, struggles, wishes? And we always write opportunity statements as from the customer's perspective, from your target profile's perspective. And you'll say kind of like, what is the higher level need that they have that we can then solve for them, right? And so we'll always write them as like, I need, or I struggle with, or I wish I had. And so putting all of those down is really important. And then putting in the potential solutions, right? So how do we solve for those needs, those struggles, those wishes? And how does the product address those identified opportunities? And so the goal here is really to map as much as you can, like all of the different previous solutions and features that you've launched, all the different things that you're considering. And you can even have a space to even ideate inside of here if you want to. But this is really a key moment in sort of saying, like, this is what our organization is trying to do. This is how these solutions connect back to an opportunity. And it's critical that a solution connects back to the opportunity and that it's framed as something that will actually solve and deliver value to the specific target profile in a way that will then drive your overall product outcome. And doing that, I've found a few different really important cases has helped to alleviate concerns from skeptical stakeholders that were concerned about, well, this discovery we're about throwing out everything that we've already done. And you're like, no, it's actually about understanding how it all connects back to itself. And also then identifying, well, if we don't know the opportunities, maybe that's we need to be doing opportunity discovery. If we don't understand how these potential solutions solve for those problems, we need to do solution discovery. And so it's a really key step in understanding how like the actual product work we're doing connects back to those needs, and how we're already setting ourselves up as an organization to deliver on that.
Right. And what are the different sources we can use within the company to identify like all the existing work that have been done to identify opportunities and the solution or potential solutions?
Yeah, so most organizations, there are really great resources. So, right, as we were saying throughout, like this is a team effort, right? This is not no one person owns the knowledge of the customer
Right.
experience, right? And so inside of the organization, you have oftentimes customer support teams, you have marketing teams, you have some like you may be an organization that has like country lead teams. Anyone that's really close to the customer is someone that you can learn from internally. You also, in a perfect world, have some behavioral analytics that you can draw on. You can have measurement of previously launched work, not always, but if that exists, that's great. And then you may have other product folks within inside of the organization that may have been people that have worked on things that actually now fall into this space, or you look back and go, this feature that we launched actually did address this, and what did we learn from that? And so they all become really amazing people that can then weigh in and bring their expertise to the table to help really flesh this out. And so ultimately, the more sources of insight and information and that you can draw on, the richer this is going to be.
Right. And you talked about the like customer support team, or even we can think about the sales team or pre-sales team. How, like, do you have any tips on how to collaborate with them? I have in mind that sometimes we can easily become the ball and chain, you see, and not the lever. So how to be the lever, how to have like a great collaboration with people without being too much like time consuming for these guys. Do you have examples about like how you did that based on your past experience at Hopin, Bubble, Etsy?
Sure, yeah, and I'm glad you called out sales, because sales is actually one of if you have a sales team, it's such an amazing resource. Like they're in contact with customers all the time. And so currently I actually spend quite a bit of time connecting with both customer support and sales. And so lightweight ways is actually just to create like shared Slack channels to like have lightweight communication back and forth. If your organization uses something like Gong or another tool like that, those are actually amazing resources full of data, and people can just say, hey, I'm going to point you towards these couple calls that we had recently that are really useful. You can sometimes shadow with them, or just like join calls or pop in on things, and you can say, here's this profile that we're looking at, and they can say, okay, we're talking to these following folks in the future, do you want to just join? And that's something I'll oftentimes do, and I actually just doing it this weekend, last week. They'll say, okay, we're talking to this person, do you want to join? I'm like, throw me in, and then I'll grab some time and ask about a couple specific things. But having that really clear target profile helps you to identify that and share that information with them. And then other things are if they actually put together any kind of like write-ups or share kind of like top like feedback or complaints. Product board is a tool that's oftentimes used to categorize those things. And so trying to get those insights from those folks without interrupting them, they're really busy, right? Particularly sales teams are on back-to-back calls all day long, is really important. And then sometimes it's possible to actually, if they have it, if you do it, you can actually do workshops. And I've done workshops around this where people actually generate these. You can actually do it asynchronously sometimes, or you can actually create almost like that structure, and they can come in and throw additional stuff that they know. Or synchronously, if you actually have the luxury of time where you can have a session and everyone can kind of come in and input all of their stuff, and you can create it afterwards. And you can do it in even 45 minutes sometimes, but I've done asynchronous and synchronous.
Cool. Cool. Very curious to learn from the audience. How do they handle that in the conversation with the other colleagues to review existing work? And I just wanted to emphasize on something you shared and mentioned about the opportunity and how to frame the opportunities. You said like it's supposed, and we very encourage people to frame them to be user-centric and based on the true needs, expectations, triggers experienced by the user. What we often see happening is having solutions that are turned as opportunities, so they are more like framed toward features or solutions than a problem or an experience lived by the user. Do you have any tips on how to make sure that we frame a real opportunity, a true one, and that we don't jump like too fast on the solution part?
Yeah, I think that that's a great point. And I think one of the most common things that I've seen throughout my career and now within inside of our cohorts, right? Like solutions are fun to think about, they're fun to talk about, and they're exciting. But I do think the framing it in the language of the actual user is one really critical thing. So it's easier to write a solution as like a feature idea and just put the label. And then when you sort of think about if it has to be like I wish I struggled, you kind of pushes your brain to complete it as a higher level need, as opposed to just like fast checkout, right? Like you're like, I want like fast checkout. You're like, all right, I struggle with checking out, right? It shifts the framing around. And that's one of the really important things about writing it out in that way is it's harder to just put like a solution idea on it. But it's one of those things to check and double check, and then getting that way of thinking is really important. And so having the target profile like really closely connected to the thinking here, like, okay, who is that person, right? And then the outcome as well. And so and thinking back to like, okay, how does this thing solve something for them in a way that will drive these? And if you can answer those and walk through that, then it's hard to, I think you've gotten there, and like you've made it to the opportunity framing in that way, because it's hard to sort of say like I struggle and then boom, solution idea.
Yeah, but sometimes we see product folks saying like writing an opportunity as I wish I have this feature. And this is kind of a solution. It's not like an opportunity based on the user problem. So what I suggest when that happen is to add because at the context. So if you say I need this feature because blah blah blah, the blah 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 after the because is actually the real opportunity. This is because the user needs this feature because he has a struggle with something, he needs something, he wishes something. So if you are not able to add the context to the opportunity, it's that you didn't frame it in a way that it's really relevant for the user.
Yeah, 100%. It's like you can almost just ask, if you can't answer why from what's been written there, like it's not there.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Okay, cool. So let's move to the next part.
Okay. So now to step 4. So step 4 is about identifying your riskiest areas, right? And so up until now, the outcomes, we have target profiles, we have opportunities, and we have solutions. And what's really critical here is that you take those and you go through an interactive process. When I say an interactive process, what's most important about this is the conversation that you have with your team and with cross-functional stakeholders. And what's really important here is drilling down into like, what are the potential risks we see here? And so using kind of Marty Kagan's risk framework, that's the one that I found to be the most successful. It's one we use at Panache, but that's looking at 4 key risks, right? Value risk, which is we know if this opportunity exists for customers? Is it urgent or painful enough? Does the solution address the opportunity? In terms of the risks, value risk is for discovery, one you really want to keep an eye on. Like if you're talking about something and you're discussing this as a team and you're saying, we see that there's a potential risk here and that these particular target profile might not actually find any value in this, that's a real red flag that you're going to need to look into something, right? Because at the end of the day, if customers don't find value in the things we build, it doesn't matter how usable or how aligned to our business plan or how easy it is to build. No one uses it, and it just is it's basically a waste of engineering time. And discovery is really well suited. Yeah.
Can you zoom in a bit, please, Brian?
Oh, sure.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Okay. So we're walking through the risk. So value risk is one to really keep an eye out, and one of the ones that discovery is extremely well suited to understanding and giving us either increased or decreased confidence in. At the end of the day, if you run discovery and realize that something is not going to be valuable and then you don't build it, like you've then opened up space to build something that's higher confidence that actually delivers value and drives the product outcomes and the results that everyone is looking for. Viability risk is, do we know how the opportunity solution generates revenue, cost, growth for the business? Is it viable for the business and the business model? Feasibility risk is like, do we have the capabilities and resources and expertise to actually address the opportunity or build the specific solution? And usability risk is, are the users able to know, access, and use the solution? And so what I've found works really well is to take the work that we've done up until now, and then as a cross-functional group, to actually go through this conversation together. And the more people you can have involved, the better, right? Engineers and engineering leads can speak to feasibility. Oftentimes, product folks, analysts, sometimes folks in marketing talk about viability and value, design, usability, and value. And so like having all of these different cross-functional folks to be able to participate in this conversation gives you a really rich understanding of the potential things that you could go after and the potential risks that are there, as well as giving you the opportunity to say maybe some of these things actually aren't risky. So this solution and this opportunity, we actually have a lot of confidence in, and we don't see much risk. And so that's something that you actually wouldn't need to do discovery on. And so what we do is actually then go as a team and you take all of the evidence you already have up until now and internal data, and we have a mapping exercise. You can do it in different ways. At the end of the day, the conversations that you have here are the most important, and really that framing around like, what are the risks in pursuing this particular thing? What risks do we see? What risks don't we see? But inside of this 2x2, you can actually map like which of these is the most risky versus the least risky, and which ones would have the least impact versus the most impact on the outcomes that we're trying to drive. And then in this quadrant, you see things that are risky and are impactful. And that is a space where if you're putting something here, those are things that need discovery. And this is more art than science, but if you have the right group of people and the right conversation, and so I've done this in workshops, synchronously is often the best format for this if you're able to do it, but you can do it asynchronously as well. If you get the right people to input into this, like you can get a pretty good sense of what things feel low confidence, what things feel risky, and what things feel impactful. At the end of the day, you want to be putting things where they feel right, and then discovery will help us to understand more, right? And in that conversation, you're also identifying like knowledge gaps, what we don't know, and what things we could do. And so coming out of that, recommend prioritizing one area for discovery. All right. In your imagine world, it's the thing that's at the top right most of all of the things.
Right.
Oftentimes people will ask, like, if there's two things that seem the same, which one should we do? Hopefully there's something that will give you a sense of which one to actually do discovery with. But if you have two things that really seems like they're strong discovery needs, our recommendation, just start with one of them. And if you really can't differentiate which one will have the most impact on the product outcome, just start with one and learn and move forward. Ultimately, like that process, it will help give you more clarity moving forward. But the ultimate prioritization is really which is going to have the most impact on the product outcome, and that's the way we really think it through. And additionally, you can then share back the results with additional stakeholders, additional levels of leadership, and get some kind of alignment there to help steer the efforts. But what's really useful is you're going to come out of this with a really clear understanding of like, we think that there's a risk here of potentially, and we might not be able to build this. Okay, well, that's something you can go off and do like a spike or understand like, is this something that's actually feasible? You say this one's really, we don't understand whether, we're not sure if this is going to be valuable. Well, that's a great potential opportunity for discovery. And at this point, you can say, actually, it's the opportunity we don't understand. So you're like, okay, maybe this is opportunity discovery. Maybe it's the solution we don't understand, like that's solution discovery. And so ultimately, it's that back and forth conversation that you have that unpacks all of the real value here, and the output of it is less important necessarily than the actual process that you go through.
Right. So cool. Thank you so much, Brian. I think it's time for a small QA session. So we had great question from the audience. Let me have a look. So we had the first question there from Udipta. So the question is, I'm not exactly related to this. Okay, the question is not exactly related to this framework, but he is wondering how to get buy-in from stakeholders on the product discovery we are running in the first place. Do you have any tips on getting buy-in?
Great question. So I think in some ways it actually goes back to what we were just talking about, and that's ultimately the flexibility and the adaptability I was talking about. So even in teams and the stakeholders that were very skeptical of discovery, I haven't found anyone that didn't care about results. And so for me, I've at times implemented discovery without ever talking about discovery at all. Right. And so that's why I'm coming back to some of the language that we're using here. So outcomes, right? What is the result that we're trying to deliver? I haven't met that many people. Most people I found that are really just skeptical of discovery do care about delivering on business outcomes, the results that we all need to drive. And so getting buy-in for discovery in those situations, in my experience, has been about talking about the risks we have with delivering those results. Right. And then those risks will come back to, well, we don't know what to focus on in order to drive that. And maybe we need to figure out what that is. And we can run an experiment, or we can do this. And so framing it around the results and the expected outcomes creates a space where you're not trying to say, I need time to do discovery. You're actually saying what we're trying to do is do a better job of achieving this outcome that we've all agreed is really important. And in order to do that, we can do this. And so that's how I found it. And like ultimately, you can actually use this discovery framing process inside of other processes without ever calling it discovery. I've implemented it in quarterly planning without ever talking about it as a discovery process. You can do it as an ad hoc thing. You can do it with inside of a team and just come back with, hey, we know we're trying to do this. We've identified the following risk, but we can mitigate it because we could do this. And it can be a discovery activity, but you don't have to call it that.
Cool. Thank you, Brian. Hope it helps. We have another question from Alessandra. The question is, to avoid becoming too product and business centered, would it work to define user outcomes too? As in a way to align product outcomes and business outcomes with user goals.
Great. I love that. I love that question. I've used quite a few times in the past user outcomes or customer outcomes and inside of a similar model. And again, that's where we kind of come back to the flexibility and the adaptability. So you could I'm not sharing my screen anymore. So I've got jumping from tab to tab. So I was going to show you. But okay, if we go over here. So if we go back over here, right? So at this level, like this opportunity level, this is user focused and user framed. But I've also used customer outcomes, which is like, what's the meaningful value that you need to deliver for this particular person in order to change their behavior in a way that will drive this particular product outcome. And so that's another tool that you can use, but in a lot of ways, it's not that dissimilar from opportunities and opportunity statements, right? Because those are those needs. And so I would encourage you to use the language that feels best. But again, this level here should be able to actually do what you're talking about. And so if you want to, you can call those user outcomes. I have called them user outcomes in the past, and that's also been successful.
So cool. Thank you so much, Brian. So I will let you guys a few minutes to ask your questions if you want to. And in the meantime, Brian, I suggest we wrap up. I will be very curious to know, like, what is your final words about this discovery framing? Like, do you have one master tips to share in order to use it?
Yeah, I think that the key thing is, like, as we were saying before, is just start with it. Start small, start somewhere, just begin, right? Don't get too hung up in doing it perfectly or doing it completely correctly or the exact right words or language or how we call it. Like, you don't have to say opportunities, you don't have to call them solutions. You could call them customer outcomes, user outcomes, and features. You could call profiles personas. You could call a product outcome like a North Star. At the end of the day, just move forward with the process. Like, just identifying that we lack clarity in one of these areas creates a conversation which leads to something that didn't exist before you started. The other thing I would say is, like, don't try to figure out everything at once. Focus in on where you can actually deliver value in a short period of time. But the beautiful and magical thing about discovery is, by its very nature, we learn things that we didn't know before. We can change and iterate what we're doing based on those learnings. And so just moving forward and starting is the most important thing. Don't take up forever to set everything up and do the exact right process and line everything up. At the end of the day, sometimes the best thing about discovery is we find out something we completely didn't expect as well. And then that helps us to change our focus, our framing, our prioritization for future discoveries. And so the other thing I would say is, take this and adapt it for your own context. Like, tweak it the way to be what you need. The principles that underpin it are the most important things. And then I'll also say, like, we'd love to hear about how this works for you. Like, I love learning about how this works in everybody's context. Each company, team, organization in different countries and contexts is a little bit different. Like, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, we'll probably do things a little bit different.
Right.
And so we always want to learn more and how we can tweak and adapt and apply that same process of thinking to the processes that we use. And so I would say those would be the kind of, like, closing things. And so I love learning from this greater community of product practitioners. And so, yeah.
So cool.
It's really been awesome being able to share this with everyone. And please do ask the questions, reach out, and, like, send examples of how this worked, and maybe send examples of tweaks that you've done, right? This has changed every year. Looking back, I'm like, it's always changing. Like,
yes, please share your work with us, guys. My personal last advice would be for you to create space and time to clarify outcome, to clarify the why you are doing discovery, but the why you are working in your team and on a daily basis as well. Create this space and then refer to this outcome to move through each steps. So what are the target profiles that have the most impact on this specific outcome? What did we have discover or deliver to impact this outcome? What are the areas to de-risk in priority to reach this outcome? Like, it's very all focused on the outcome and it's provide you purpose and sense to your work. So yeah, would be my advice. I hope you liked the conversation, guys. Again, if you want any more information about the program, the Discovery program, please reach us on LinkedIn, go on our website, panache.io. And I just sent you on the chat a small feedback form. We'd love to hear from you if you liked it, the format, the chat. We'd love to have more sessions that way. So please give us your feedback. And yeah, thank you so much, Brian, for your time. Always loving to
Sure.
have conversation with you. Enjoy your day, and thanks, everybody.
All
Have a
right.
good
Thanks,
day.
Roxanne. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks for joining.
Bye. Thank you so much.